Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're working on Unit 7, and as we move into Unit 7, we are also approaching midterms, and midterm grades will be posting tomorrow, actually. I usually get them posted by around noon, and so any work that you have sitting out there from Units 0 through 5 will be included in that midterm grading. I know I did this last week, but I'm just going to do this very quickly. Here is I'm just going to kind of point out like where we sit in the course. We're covering Unit 7 tonight. You know, this is the 16th of October. In terms of grading, all the things that are included in the midterm grade will basically be Unit 5 on up and the participation. And you'll notice that originally the Unit 6 work was due tomorrow also, but I decided to push it back because I think people need a little bit more time to get that done. So Unit 6 stuff could then actually sit below this participation entry and will be part of the later part of the course. I do want you to notice as we go into Unit 7, Unit 7 has 3 deliverables in them, and the due dates are staggered. So these due dates are not accurate. I think I set the first one to the 26th, the site building maybe to the 28th or something like that. It's like pushed back pretty far, as is the launch page. So check those dates. And in fact, I can do that as we kind of go into the course here. Let's just do that really quick, since some people are seeing this for the first time. So the display and positioning is due on the 26th. The site building's due on the 30th. So the day before Halloween, and the launch page is due on the 28th. Right, so kind of staggering those out a little bit, right? And that way you don't have to feel pressure all at once to get all the work done all at once. The topics that we're going through tonight, you can see listed here at the top of your screen. So we're going to talk about the CSS display property, and we're going to look at the different approaches, which are basically block, inline block, and the really weird one, none. Right? So can you imagine you create something and you put a display property on it that says none, right? So you don't even see it. And like, what's the point of that? Well, I will explain when we get there. We'll look at different positioning elements as well, including these important keywords of static, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. And some of these are ones that, real frankly, I advise people, don't, and there's a couple in there that really can be tricky unless you know how to work with them. But some can also be really kind of fun and useful, I think, in design, depending on what your vision is. Like fixed and sticky are really kind of cool ones. We'll review this concept of top, right, bottom, left, trouble, if you remember the acronym. Right? Remember that order. We'll look at a thing called the Z-index property, which allows us to position things in front of and behind other things. We'll look at placing audio and video on your web pages and what the best practices for that are. Then we'll look at site building based on designs, considering your audience when you're building a website. We'll be looking at the inspect tool. And as I mentioned, I might just kind of, like as I'm coding, get into the tool and show you how it's used, and then just kind of do that piece kind of on the fly. And then we'll look at some different coding tools. And even though that one's at the bottom of the list, I think that's actually where I'm going to start our discussion tonight, because for most of us that are coming into this fresh, right? I right from the get-go advise to you, and I think I did this, okay, I guess it was Unit 1, right? We had this little entry here somewhere, where this entry here. So this is in Unit 1, where we talked about what tools you could use to write code for the web. And the reality is, the adage in web has always been, web designers are kind of like, well, hey, if I have a text editor, a web browser, and an internet connection, I can create anything I need for the web. And that's sort of true. And it's still possible to absolutely do it that way. And truly, whenever we use one of these IDEs, or what we call an integrated development environment, we use them because of the extra tools that they bring in that you might not get from a plain text editor like Notepad in Windows or TextEdit on the Mac. Visual Studio Code is the recommended product that we're recommending to our students right now, mostly because it is kind of hot right now out in the industry, right? Like a lot of people like to use it, and that means there's a lot of support for it. A lot of people are writing extensions for it. And there's a lot of really cool extensions that you can add to Visual Studio Code to enhance how it operates when you're writing stuff for the web. So for example, and I'm going to do this actually using Gemini here. I'm going to ask an AI, you know, what are good extensions to add to Visual Studio Code to enhance, gotta spell that right. And I'm just like posing this as a question because you might do a similar thing. And it's really kind of interesting, some of the tools that are available, and some of them are kind of interesting. So like the one thing that we've been doing, for example, is when we're coding, I make a change in Visual Studio Code, and then I bounce over to the browser and refresh the page after I've saved it to see the change. Right. And that's kind of become sort of routine. There is a really popular extension called Live Server that you can add that will basically reload your page on the fly as you're changing it within Visual Studio Code without needing to save it or go to the browser and refresh. So this is one you might want to play with. That mimics the tool that we find inside of Brackets. Brackets has a similar tool that does the same thing. And Brackets is basically the free version of Dreamweaver. And then this, I guess, that has been retired. This is sort of semi-retired now. And they have this like web-based version now called Phoenix, which runs in the browser, which you should check out. I haven't tried it much, but you might want to check it out. And I say this really kind of it for a couple of reasons, you guys. There's no reason to be stuck on using a particular tool. You know, often it's kind of like a pair of shoes. Like you wear a pair of shoes and you're just used to that pair of shoes. And then all of a sudden you put on like a really good pair of like hiking boots or sneakers or something, like, oh my God, where have these shoes been? You know, these are the shoes for me, you know, and you don't know until you try them on and actually use them to do functional work. So I would encourage you to explore some of these products here and try different ones. I've always been a big fan of using Dreamweaver, and in previous iterations of the course, I almost always exclusively lean on that product just because I'm so comfortable with it, you know. And now that one is not really prominent out in the workplace, but I still like the product quite a bit because it's just comfortable for me. I know how it works. I can get around it really fast. And real frankly, I think the CSS tools inside of it are still better than in any product out there. Another one that's really notable is to work with JetBrains. I am going to go to the JetBrains website, and some people who are coders in our program maybe already know of these products, but they have a whole collection of developer software tools. And if I click on these are all their coding tools that they have. Right? All of these are coding environments. They're what we call their granddaddy IDE, like the big killer product is called IntelliJ IDEA, which can do all of the stuff on the page here, like if you just add the right plugins. But they do have tools that are built specifically for creating web pages in JavaScript code, which is called WebStorm. Later on in the web program, your instructors might also push you to use PHP Storm. And then if you take the Python classes, we might suggest PyCharm. And if you write C# code, we might suggest Rider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The catch with this service, though, is the stuff's not free. They do have an education area where you can go in and you can get a license as a student. So you just make your request before you download anything. This is my advice. Request with your student ID or your student email account. Request the account. You'll send you like a code or a key or something, and then you can come in here and grab any of the tools for free. The WebStorm tool, though, is kind of considered one of the preeminent tools, especially when you start writing JavaScript code and doing advanced web work with some environments. I'll still argue that Visual Studio Code can probably do everything this does, but this is a professional grade product, you know, where I don't have to go hunting for extensions and stuff. They're just all built in. And it's a little more powerful. It also has FTP built into it, so you can FTP from right inside the product. Visual Studio Code can support that as well, and I'm just kind of putting it out there as something to kind of consider as you're trying different editors. I do have links to all the products here that you might want to check out, but Visual Studio Code is still the recommendation for this class ultimately. And so if you choose to just stick with that, you will be absolutely fine. But I do like to just kind of point that out to you as we get started here, that you shouldn't feel hemmed into using one product. Like if you don't like the way the editor feels or looks or works or anything like that, there's no harm done in trying something else and finding that new favorite pair of shoes is kind of my recommendation. Especially if you're considering this as a career path, I would strongly suggest that. All right, since we are going to kind of code pretty much right off the bat, I'm going to go through my standard file maintenance techniques here. So I'm going to get into my file and folder structure. So I'm bringing over a file window, and then inside this folder here is where I store all my stuff for Prometheus. And this is going to sort of relate a little bit to the launch page assignment that's listed in Unit 7. But what I have going on in this folder, and you notice I don't call it like web programming or gateway or anything like that. I'm calling it, this is my Prometheus utility accounts, and I have 3 of them, right? So I have like an A, a B, and a C account, that all for different purposes. But my teaching one is the C account. And so anytime I teach a web-related class where I'm publishing stuff to Prometheus, I throw it in this folder. And because, you know, one of the classes I've taught the most is the one we're taking right now, which is web programming. You can see I have a lot of different versions of that, right? So, you know, so every semester I've taught it. Basically, they're here. When we used to do case studies out of our textbook, I would have separate folders for that. And then I would, you know, have links to JavaScript stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, what exists in this folder here on my machine, and it's really in my Google Drive, but conceptually it's on my machine, is identical to the folder that I have on Prometheus. It's got all the same folders and all the same content. So the launch page I create, this one, sits in the root of that account and can access all the stuff in my local folders. And then when I pick up all of this content and move it over to the server, that also is mimicked on the server. And if you're not in the situation yet where you're organizing your files in a way that they're logically structured, planning for the future. In other words, so this semester will end, and you go to your JavaScript class next semester, you're going to have a JavaScript folder like I have here. And then you'll have a web programming folder like I have here, right? And then inside those folders are the unit folders for the content. And the launch page that you're creating sits above the course folders, the unit folders. It sits in the root of the account, and that's what makes that function. All right, let's do the file management piece, though. I am going to copy my unit 6. So let's do a copy. Let's paste it back in. And we'll call that unit 7. I'm going to go in and take a look. This is what I have in there right now. And here's my word of caution to you. Because I have 2 separate assignments listed for Unit 7. One is a display and positioning assignment, and the other one is a site building assignment where you might choose to build your final project. You may decide, and this is very subjective depending on your choice, I'm just telling you this up front, to create 2 separate folders. one for the Unit 7 display and positioning homework, and one folder for your project, whatever that might happen to be. If they are one and the same, which they might be, you could put them in the same folder hypothetically. I would caution you though, because with the site building assignment, I kind of want you to have a fresh start. So here's what I'm going to recommend. I'm going to recommend that you create a new folder, and you can call it project, right? Whatever your project is. And of course, I get a phone call while I'm in class. And you could have a separate folder for the Unit 7 homework, and you can name that whatever you wish. So that would be subjective depending on what your needs are. If the Unit 7 homework is basically going to be your project, then you can kind of all do it in the same folder structure. And then you can give me a link to your display and positioning homework, and then give me a link to the homepage for the site building assignment. And then we'll roll from there. Right. So I'm hoping that helps to clarify those two pieces, because that might be a concern. All right. So decide what you're going to do in that regard. I think I'm going to probably leave everything in the root folder. I don't anticipate changing my project, so I'm just telling you that up front. But this is something you might want to do just to keep your work organized, especially, if your project is different than what you've been doing for homework. So just be mindful of that. I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code here, and I'm going to attach to that folder to kind of get rolling with the work. And let me get my natural language stuff out of the way there. And we are going to open up that same thing right here. Got to find it first. And you see how it helps to organize your stuff and know where your stuff is at. And I almost lost my place there for a second. All right, so I'm going to be working on Unit 7 tonight, so I'll just select that folder to sit over here in the sidebar. I'm going to close the welcome screen, close the chat window for now. And let's get ready to do a little bit of coding. And I think maybe always a good place to start is let's open up what we have right now in the browser and just take a look, right? And so this is where I left it last week, right? Now, when the session ended, most of you guys split right away, but I kept coding for a little while, and I ended up tweaking my header, and you have to admit it looks a little bit nicer than it did probably before you left. And it wasn't really that fancy to get there, by the way. What I really did is I basically got rid of the grass background. I put it behind the bottom part of the page. And then I got the logo up here to sort of sit nicely with the letters. It's not really perfect, honestly, but you have to admit it looks a lot better than it did before. It's a little tastier or whatever you want to call it. If I look at my contact page, it hasn't changed much. There's my, I guess, about page with my table and my weird image. And then this was my code page where I was testing concepts. And most of what I'm going to do today, by the way, is going to be happening on this page with the display positioning stuff. When I get to the point of adding multimedia, I'll probably create a separate page for it. So I'm just kind of giving you a heads up of where I'm going with it. But I think now I'm ready to code. So let's look at the first topic then in the lecture materials here. So the first thing that we bring up is this display property. And we had started talking last week about the div tag and the span tag. And you'll see those be used as examples here in the lecture notes. Because remember, a div is what we call a block level element, and it occupies the full width of whatever thing it sits inside of. That might be the body tag or another element. And if I put one div on the page, the next one I place in the code on the page will appear below it, because that's how block level elements work. Conversely, if I do inline elements like a span tag, those will sit next to each other, like adding another word to a sentence. It's interesting to note that images are inline tags. Anchor tags or links are also inline tags, and that has to be considered when you're putting them on the screen. If you want your image to behave like a block level element, you usually have to put it in a container or a div of some sort. Now, there are some other display properties that we can utilize. For example, inline block, where I can tell an element that sits in line to basically behave like a block level element. So like read the description on this, and it says this is a hybrid. The element is placed in the same line as other content, like a regular inline style, but you can set a specific width and height on it like a block. And this is really useful. It says for creating navigation links or buttons that need specific dimensions, but should stay in a row. And real frankly, when I was like looking at the rendering of my Green Bay Packer page and trying to figure out how to lay these two things on the screen, I was running into that and I'm like, oh, I know how to fix it. Oh, but I really shouldn't do that because I haven't taught it yet. Right. And so now we'll introduce the tools that help that to happen. Excuse me for just a moment.